My wife cheated on me with our best friend and then sued me for half of our $2 million house and $300, $0 in savings, claiming I was hiding assets. Things got even darker when I found out she was planning to leave me for her lover, who's actually our accountant. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, but here I am, trying to piece together the mess my life has become. It started with the usual little signs, missed texts, late nights, and her suddenly being more defensive than normal. But what really tipped me off was the way she started dressing differently, more provocative, and spending more time with friends that I didn't even know she had. Honestly, I ignored most of it at first, telling myself she was just going through a phase or maybe just stressed from work. We've been married for 10 years, and I thought I knew her better than anyone. Then came the night I caught her. I was working late, or so I told myself, and decided to check her phone just to see if she was really busy or just avoiding me. That's when I saw the messages. It started with innocent banter, but then I saw the way she was talking about our weekends and how much she loved him. Her lover, it turned out, was our accountant, James. I don't know how I missed the signs, but there it was, clear as day. She was cheating on me with James, the guy who's been handling our taxes, investments, everything financial for years. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My mind raced, trying to process how someone I trusted, someone I'd considered a friend, could do this to me. I'd always been the one handling the money, making sure everything was in order. We had a pretty solid financial setup, roughly $2 million in the house and about $300, $0 in savings. I always believed we were secure, that she trusted me to keep everything stable. But seeing those texts, that blatant disrespect, it shattered that illusion. It was like a betrayal on every level, personal, financial, moral. I didn't just feel angry. No, that was just the surface. Beneath that, I was hurt, betrayed, and honestly, a little numb. I didn't want to believe it at first. Maybe she was just talking trash or exaggerating. But then I saw the pictures. She had sent him a selfie in our bed, wearing that stupid silk robe I bought her for her birthday. And the worst part, she had sent him a message saying she couldn't wait to get away from me and start their new life together. That was the moment I knew I had to confront her, no matter how much it was going to hurt. The next morning I sat her down. I was furious, trembling with rage and heartbreak. I showed her the messages, expecting her to deny, to lie, to make some kind of excuse. But her reaction was almost worse. She scoffed, rolled her eyes, and told me I was paranoid. Said I was overreacting, that I was imagining things because I didn't want to admit she needed more excitement. She spun a web of lies, claiming she and James were just friends, that I was insecure, that I was controlling. But I knew better. I knew her, and I could see the guilt in her eyes. That look, like a guilty child caught with her hand in the cookie jar, made my blood boil. I was shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. How could she just lie so easily? How could she pretend that all those texts and photos meant nothing? She told me I was being unreasonable, that I was paranoid, that I should trust her, but I couldn't, not after what I'd seen. And yet part of me still didn't want to believe it was true. I wanted to think maybe I was wrong, maybe I'd misread everything. But deep down, I knew the truth. It was staring me right in the face. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything, trying to find some way to fix it, some way to salvage what was left of our marriage. But I also knew that trust, once broken like this, is almost impossible to repair. The betrayal cut so deep that I wondered if I'd ever be able to look at her the same way again. I started thinking about the finances, about how much she had to gain from this betrayal, her plan to leave me for James, and how she was already scheming to get her hands on my money. That's when the real fear set in. What if she's already planning her escape and I'm just too blind to see it? That's when I decided I had to be smart. I needed to protect what was mine, because if she was planning to run off with James, I'd be left with nothing. I started digging into our bank accounts, our investments, anything that might give me a clue about her plans. I also began to realize how much I'd let her manipulate me over the years. Her bitchy attitude, her lies, her constant need for validation from other men. I was so caught up in the routine, the happily married life, that I never saw the storm coming. Now I was caught right in the middle of it, with everything I worked for on the line and my own trust shattered into 1,000 pieces. It's only been a few days, but I already feel like I'm living in some kind of nightmare. I don't know what's worse, her betrayal or the fact that she's already planning to leave me for James. The thought of her sneaking off, taking what she can, and leaving me to pick up the pieces makes my blood boil. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to get played like this, but here I am trying to figure out how to fight back. I've got some plans forming, and I'll be damned if I let her walk away with everything we built together. After I found out about her affair, everything changed overnight. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. The house felt different, like it was haunted by her lies. I kept going over the texts, the photos, the way she looked at him in those messages. It was like a punch in the stomach every time I remembered that she was planning to leave me for James, our trusted accountant. I knew I had to act fast, but I also knew I couldn't let her see me sweat. That's when I started digging into our financials more aggressively. It wasn't just about catching her in the act anymore. It was about protecting myself, protecting what was mine. I'd always been the one managing the money, making sure everything was in order, but now I had to get a full picture of what she was planning. I pulled out bank statements, looked into our investment accounts, and even checked the receipts from her recent shopping sprees. I wanted to know if she'd been draining our savings or hiding assets. Honestly, I was furious. How could she betray me like this and think she could get away with it? While I was doing that, she was still acting like everything was normal. She'd come home, act bitchy when I asked questions, and then accuse me of being paranoid. She'd lie about where she'd been, claiming she was at the gym or with her friend Lisa, but I knew better. I'd seen her texts with James, talking about how they couldn't wait to be free from me. I also noticed her deleting messages, trying to cover her tracks, but I was quick enough to see some of them. That's when I realized just how far she'd gone to hide her affair. One night, I decided I'd had enough. I set up a hidden recording device in the living room, just in case she slipped up again. I wanted concrete proof of her lies, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. The next day, she came home from her meeting with Lisa, and I confronted her. I told her I knew everything, that I'd seen the messages, the photos, and the way she was planning to leave me for James. Her reaction was classic. She tried to deny everything, said I was imagining things, that I was just jealous and insecure. She even accused me of being controlling, as if that somehow justified her cheating. But I wasn't buying her lies anymore. I kept calm and told her I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I told her I was going to protect what's ours, that I'd be damned if she walked out with half the house and our savings, especially when she was the one who betrayed me. That's when she started yelling, calling me paranoid, claiming I was crazy. She said I was overreacting and that she'd never cheat on me. But I had the evidence, and I knew she was lying. The look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She was planning her escape, and she was trying to spin it like I was the one at fault. The emotional was intense. I went from feeling numb to pure anger, then to sadness I didn't want to admit. I felt betrayed not just as a husband, but as a man who had trusted his wife for a decade. How could she do this? How could she lie so easily, pretend to love me while secretly planning her new life with James? The worst part was the feeling of helplessness. I had no idea how far she'd gone to hide assets or what she was planning next. She kept insisting she loved me, that she didn't want to leave, but her actions told a different story. I saw through her bullshit. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what yet. I was angry enough to blow everything up, but I also knew I needed to be strategic. I started talking to a lawyer, trying to understand my rights. I needed to know if she could really take half the house, or if I had some way to protect myself. I also reached out to a private investigator, just in case she was planning to liquidate assets or transfer money offshore. I didn't trust her anymore. I had to be prepared for whatever she threw at me. As I sat there staring at the bank statements and the evidence I'd gathered, I felt a mixture of hatred and determination. I was going to let her walk away with everything. I was going to fight for what I deserved. I realized this wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about standing up for myself, about reclaiming some measure of control after being by her betrayal. I knew the road ahead was going to be ugly, but I was ready to face it. And that's when I started planning my next move, one that would turn the tables on her, make her regret ever crossing me. I wasn't just going to sit back and let her take what she wanted. No, I was going to make sure she paid for what she did in ways she never saw coming. The game was on, and I was determined to come out on top. I spent the next few days in a state of shock and fury, combing through every financial detail I could find. The more I looked, the more I realized she had been planning her escape for months. She started using cash for small purchases, hiding receipts, and transferring money into accounts I didn't even know she was aware of. I learned she'd opened a secret savings account under a fake name, probably with the money she'd been squirreling away from the joint account. That's when I knew I had to act fast if I was going to stop her. I contacted my lawyer that very day. We went over everything, her texts, the bank statements, the suspicious transfers. The lawyer explained that she might have a case to claim part of the house, but I had ways to protect my assets if I acted quickly. I also hired a private investigator to keep tabs on her, especially to see if she was making moves to liquidate assets or talk to anyone else about leaving. I was determined not to let her get away with this without a fight. Meanwhile, she kept up her act of being the perfect wife. She'd come home, act sweet, then suddenly turn bitchy when I asked questions. She told me I was paranoid, that I was imagining things, that I was overreacting. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I knew her too well. The texts and photos told the real story. She was planning her exit, and she was doing everything she could to cover her tracks. It was like watching a snake slowly slither away, and I was just standing there trying to catch her before she disappeared. One night, I caught her trying to sneak out of the house with a duffel bag. She claimed she was going to her sister's place, but I knew better. I followed her quietly and saw her meet James at a nearby hotel. That's when I realized she was already planning her new life with him. I was furious, but I kept my composure. I confronted her right there in the parking lot, telling her I knew everything. Her face paled, but she quickly turned into a bitchy, defiant version of herself. "You're crazy," she snapped. "You're just jealous because I'm finally happy. James and I are just friends. You're overreacting as usual." But I wasn't buying her lies anymore. I had the evidence, and I knew she was lying to control the narrative. I told her she wasn't going anywhere until we sorted this out. That was the moment I realized I had to be smarter. I couldn't let her run off with her lover and half my money. The next day, I started documenting everything, her meetings, her conversations, even her plans to leave. I took screenshots of her texts with James, recorded her phone calls when I could. I wanted proof, not just for her to see, but for the legal fight that was coming. I also contacted a forensic accountant to review our finances, to see if she'd been hiding assets or diverting funds. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with, because I wasn't about to let her walk away with a penny more than what was fair. At the same time, I began talking to friends and family, telling them what was happening. I needed support, and I also needed to warn them that she was planning to leave. I could see the subtle shifts in her behavior, more secretive, more aggressive, like she was already preparing for her new life. The thought of her sneaking off with James, leaving me with nothing but an empty house and broken trust, made my stomach turn. I decided I'd fight for everything I had, including the house, the savings, and even the rights to our investments. I also started planning my revenge. Not in a petty way, but in a way that would make her regret crossing me. I knew she wanted to take everything, but I was going to make sure she paid a price for her betrayal. I wasn't just going to sit back and let her destroy what we built. I was going to expose her lies, fight her in court, and make her see that she couldn't just cheat, lie, and then walk away with my life savings. I had nothing to lose now and everything to gain by standing my ground. The emotional toll was heavy. I felt humiliated, betrayed, and angry all at once. But beneath that, there was a strange clarity. I realized I'd been too trusting, too naive. I let her manipulate me, let her control the finances, let her lie to my face. But now I was taking back control. I was going to fight for my dignity, my money, and my sanity. I knew she'd try to spin things her way, but I had the evidence, and I was ready to go to war if I had to. I wasn't sure exactly how this was going to end, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her ruin me. Not without a fight. The next step was clear. I had to prepare for a legal battle, and I had to make sure she understood that I wasn't going to be her pawn anymore. This was about more than money. It was about respect, about standing up for myself after everything she'd done. And I was determined to do just that. The days that followed were like walking through a storm I couldn't see the end of. I kept reviewing every piece of evidence I had gathered, making sure I was ready for the legal fight ahead. I knew she was planning her move. She'd started acting even more bitchy, more dismissive, like she was trying to push me into a corner. But I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I'd learned her game, and now I was playing to win. I met with my lawyer again. We drafted a plan to freeze some of our joint accounts and set up a legal injunction to prevent her from transferring assets. We also filed for a formal investigation into her finances, especially her secret savings account and any other hidden assets she might have squirreled away. The lawyer warned me that she'd probably try to claim she was entitled to half of everything, but I knew I had enough proof to fight her on it. I had the texts, the photos, the bank statements, and the recordings. I was ready to prove she'd been planning her escape for months. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on her. The private investigator reported she was making plans, talking about moving out of the house, and even talking to real estate agents. She was clearly preparing to leave, and I had to stop her before she liquidated everything. I also found out she'd been talking to James about buying a new place, a condo downtown, and that she'd already started lining up movers. It was happening faster than I expected, but I refused to let her get away with it without a fight. One evening, I decided I had to confront her again. I sat her down, calmly but firmly, and laid out everything I knew. I told her I was aware of her plans, her affair, and her attempts to hide assets. I told her I had evidence, and that I wasn't going to let her walk away with half our house or our savings. She looked at me with that bitchy smirk, trying to act innocent, but I saw through it. I told her I'd be filing for a divorce and I'd be fighting for my rights. She snapped, saying I was overreacting, that I was just jealous, that she still loved me and didn't want to leave. But I knew better. Her reaction was classic, defensive, angry, guilt-ridden. She accused me of being paranoid, of not trusting her, and spun some story about how she was just stressed and needed space. I didn't buy it. I told her she was lying, that I had enough proof to take her to court and get everything I was entitled to. I also warned her that I was prepared to expose her lies publicly if she kept pushing me. I wasn't going to let her turn this into some kind of game where she came out on top. At that point, I could see her frustration boiling over. She started yelling that I was the problem, that I was controlling, that she deserved more excitement and attention. She claimed I was a bad husband, that I'd never really cared about her, and that she was only doing what she had to do to be happy. It was all just words, blame, shifting, deflections, but I'd heard enough. I told her that if she wanted to leave, she could do so legally, but she wasn't taking the house, the savings, or anything else until the court sorted it out. I was done being played. That night I couldn't sleep again. My mind kept racing. I wondered how far she'd go, how much she'd try to take, and whether I'd be able to stop her. I kept thinking about the house, our life savings, her plans to leave with James. It all felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, but I knew I had to keep fighting. If she was planning to run off with my money and start a new life with her lover, I had to make sure I fought for what was mine. I was ready to go to court, to fight for custody of the house, the savings, everything. I started drafting a timeline, everything I knew, everything she'd done, everything I could prove. I also decided I'd leak some of this information to close friends and family, just to make her realize she couldn't keep her lies hidden forever. I wanted her to feel the pressure, to understand that her betrayal was going to cost her more than she thought. I'd been naive, trusting her for too long, but now I was taking control. I knew this was going to get ugly, but I was prepared for that. I had nothing to lose anymore, only to gain. The worst part was knowing she was already planning her next move, probably trying to sell the house or transfer money while I was busy fighting her in court. She'd always been manipulative, bitchy, and good at lying her way out of trouble. But I'd learned her game and I was ready. I'd make sure she paid for her betrayal. I was done being the victim. From now on, I was going to be the one in control, and I was determined to see this through, no matter how dark things got. The legal process moved faster than I expected, and I realized I had to accelerate my plans. She was making moves behind my back, talking to lawyers, trying to get her hands on the house, and even attempting to transfer some of our assets into her sister's name. I caught wind of it through my private investigator and the forensic accountant I hired. It was clear she was desperate to get out before I could legally stop her. That's when I decided I had to act decisively. I instructed my lawyer to file for an emergency injunction to freeze all our joint accounts and prevent her from transferring any assets. I also prepared to file for divorce, citing infidelity and financial misconduct. I wanted her to know I was serious. I also gathered all the evidence I had: screenshots, recordings, witness statements, and organized everything into a comprehensive file. I was going to show the court she'd been planning her escape for months, that she'd been hiding assets and trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Meanwhile, I kept surveillance on her, following her movements, watching her meet with James, and checking her phone when she wasn't looking. She was still acting bitchy, trying to gaslight me into thinking I was paranoid. But I knew the truth. I saw her meeting James at the hotel again, heard her on the phone talking about her plans, and even caught her trying to access our joint account online. Each new piece of evidence only strengthened my resolve. I was determined to end her schemes before she could do any more damage. One night she came home unexpectedly early. I was sitting in my office, going over the latest bank statements when she stormed in furious. She accused me of spying, of invading her privacy, and called me a controlling asshole. I just looked at her and calmly said, "You're not going anywhere with my house and my money. I've already taken steps to protect everything I've worked for. You're not going to run off with James and leave me holding the bag." Her face twisted into a glare, and she yelled that I was ruining everything, that I didn't trust her, that she was just trying to start fresh. That was the moment I realized she was starting to panic. Her bitchy facade was cracking, and she was trying to threaten me, manipulate me, but I wasn't buying her BS anymore. I told her I'd be going to court, and I'd be fighting for full custody of the house and the savings. I warned her that if she kept trying to hide assets or transfer money, I'd have her investigated for fraud. I was done playing nice. If she wanted to screw me over, she'd have to do it in court. The emotional toll was heavy. I felt exhausted, betrayed, and furious all at once. But beneath that, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I'd been a fool to trust her so blindly. Now I saw her for what she really was, a bitchy, manipulative woman who'd been planning her escape for months. I realized I had to let go of the hope that she'd suddenly change or come clean. The only way forward was to fight for what's mine and make sure she paid a price for her betrayal. I started drafting my legal strategy, preparing for the worst-case scenario. I knew she'd try to spin stories, lie, or even accuse me of abuse or controlling behavior to get sympathy. But I had the evidence, and I was ready to use it. I also decided to get a forensic accountant to track every dollar she'd hidden or transferred. I had to be prepared to take her to court and fight for my rights. It was going to be a long, ugly battle, but I was ready for it. All the while, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd trusted with everything, was now someone I barely recognized. She'd lied, cheated, and planned to leave me for her lover, James, who was supposed to be our friend. It was a dark, painful realization, but it also sparked a fire in me. I was no longer going to be the victim. I was going to stand up, fight back, and make her understand that she couldn't just walk away with my house, my savings, and my life. I owed myself that much. This was about more than money now. It was about reclaiming my dignity and ending her manipulative game once and for all. The court date finally arrived after weeks of chaos and planning. I was nervous, but I also felt a strange sense of relief. Everything I had uncovered, her secret accounts, the texts, the recordings, was laid out clearly. My lawyer had prepared a solid case, and I knew I had the truth on my side. She tried to play the victim, crying about how I was controlling and jealous, but it didn't matter. The evidence spoke for itself. I had everything documented, everything pointing to her deliberate attempt to cheat and manipulate her way out of our marriage. When the judge called the case, I presented my evidence calmly, methodically. I explained how she'd been hiding assets, planning her escape with James, and trying to take half of everything we'd built. I told the court about the texts, the secret accounts, her attempts to transfer property, and her meetings with James at the hotel. I saw her squirm in her seat, her bitchy attitude replaced with panic. She tried to deny everything, but her lies crumbled under the weight of the proof. The judge didn't buy her excuses. She granted my request for a full injunction, freezing her access to our joint accounts and preventing her from transferring any assets. The court also awarded me sole custody of the house temporarily, pending a full hearing. I could see the relief in her eyes, but it was too late. She had already lost her leverage. Her plans to leave with my money and start a new life with James were effectively over. In the end, she was ordered to return all the money she transferred illegally and to provide a full account of her hidden assets. The court also awarded me a larger share of the savings, considering her misconduct. She was furious, screaming and crying, but I felt nothing but a cold satisfaction. I had fought hard and I'd won. I had taken back control of my life, my money, and my future. The aftermath was a whirlwind. She moved out of the house, leaving behind her lies and her manipulations. She tried to spin her story to friends and family, claiming I was abusive and controlling, but I had the evidence to counter her every lie. I knew the truth, and I knew I'd done everything I could to protect myself. I finally felt a weight lift off my shoulders, knowing I stood up for myself and refused to be a victim. Looking back, I realize how much I've learned from this nightmare. Trust is fragile and betrayal cuts deeper than I ever imagined. But I also learned that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours, your dignity, your assets, your sanity. I'm still healing, and I know the scars will stay, but I also know I'm stronger now. I'm rebuilding my life, piece by piece, without her. And honestly, I don't miss the lies, the betrayal, or the bitchy attitude she brought into my life. I've gained clarity, strength, and a new sense of independence. To anyone going through something similar, don't ignore the signs. Trust your instincts, gather your evidence, and don't be afraid to fight for what's rightfully yours. The truth always comes out in the end. And sometimes the best revenge is simply walking away, knowing you stood your ground and refused to be broken. That's what I did, and I've never felt more free.